this old thing? Thank you! I've had it for a few hours. You know, I could totally show you how to make one, right? Come on! I'm actually going to show you how to put together 2 wreaths. And I'd love to do a whole let's see if they turned out moment here, but come on, this intro is kind of a spoiler. So let me just take off my lovely necklace here before it chokes me. Oh.
Two hours later.
The first wreath is like a level 1 wreath, because I'm using a wreath form for it that I got at the dollar store. Did I mention moving is expensive? Using a wreath form definitely makes things easier, and I figured that if I did this one successfully, then I would level up and try something a little bit more complicated for the next one. Clearly, I needed 2 wreaths because for the first time in my life, I live in a place with 2 doors. I know, right? It's all very, very exciting. And of course, it's totally normal to want to have a wreath on every single door in your place, right? Yeah. For this particular wreath, I got some colorful tulips. Mostly because they were on sale, but also just because, well, they were really pretty and colorful. And to contrast the bright colors and to make things a little bit more tame, I decided to pair them with white flowers. And of course, some greenery. It is a wreath after all. Basically, a wreath form is so great because you don't even need to use glue. All you really need to do is cut apart your greenery and your flowers using wire cutters or just a really strong pair of scissors. Now this part is very, very important. You really need to keep the stems long, and then you just shove them into your wreath form. I don't know what on earth this was, but apparently this is my motion for shove. But yes, you need to shove them in, because they're just not going to want to go in otherwise. Then the rest of the process is pretty much the very, very fun part of just moving things around until you like how they look. Now, I'm pretty indecisive, so this part took me like an hour. So this was pretty much where most of my wreath making time went, but definitely feel free to use your time more wisely. Now, to enjoy the fruits of your labor, you need to hang the wreath. And for this part, it's good to use some sticky hooks from the hardware store. The amount of weight that your hooks are supposed to be able to handle should be quite a bit heavier than your actual wreath. Just because, in my personal opinion of using sticky hooks to hang up just random things, the manufacturers lie. And unless you get something that's supposed to be able to handle a much heavier object, whatever you're trying to hang is just going to fall down in a few days. I'm sure they have some perfectly legal explanation for this too, like you're only supposed to be attaching the hooks to drywall, and you're supposed to be keeping them at 26.5 degrees Celsius and at exactly 34.7% humidity. Otherwise, you might not get the same results. It's just easier to buy a stronger hook. Also, you may have noticed that I'm actually hanging the wreaths on the inside of the doors. Just because, well, I put a bunch of effort into them and I want to actually be able to see them on a daily basis. You know, if my neighbors want to have wreaths, well, they can watch this DIY video and make their own. Also, we do tend to have some pretty strong storms in the area with winds that can knock down flower pots. So unless I want my wreaths to end up on the other side of town, they're going to be hanging indoors. So, since the first wreath was a success and only cost me around $12, I decided to tackle something harder. For this second wreath, the level 2 wreath, I used a garden hose. Why? Let's see how that turned out, shall we? So, if you want to make your very own garden hose wreath, the first thing you need to do is cut your garden hose to the right size. Here though, you need to leave 3 or 4 inches of overlap. Otherwise, you risk your wreath falling apart when you actually put it together. I used wire cutters to cut the hose, and it actually works pretty well. To actually attach the 2 ends together, I used floral tape, just because they had it at the store and it was green. So I thought it would blend in nicely with the rest of the wreath. But you can use a lot of things. For example, you can use black or dark green electrical tape, clear tape, or even duct tape. All you have to do is paint it a dark color. Now, the overlap point isn't very attractive, so it's a good idea to add something big here. I personally decided to add a burlap bow, but you can add anything you want, like a large flower or a particularly dense chunk of greenery, if that's what you're using for your wreath. I actually realized mid-bow that I don't know how to make one. I thought making a burlap bow would be really easy, but apparently there's a certain skill to it that I just didn't have. This should be a strong indication of my skill level when it comes to DIYs. So, after looking up a burlap bow tutorial, I found out that you pretty much just make a certain number of loops until it looks about right, leave some extra for the ends. You then cut that piece into two separate pieces, one of which you will be using for the ends. That should be your smaller piece. Create your bows with your larger piece, and tie it all up with whatever you left for the ends. Move things around until it looks pretty, trim the ends until they look pretty, and you have your bow. After that, it's time for the fun part, which is pretty much just arranging everything the way you want it to look. First, gather all your materials, so whatever greenery and flowers you plan to use, and cut them all apart with wire cutters, like we did for the previous wreath. And again, make sure to leave the stems long. I'm actually really indecisive, and this was only my second time making a wreath in general and my first time making a wreath without a wreath form, so I didn't attach anything in this step. But if you're feeling more confident, feel free to save yourself some time and start attaching things as you go. When you have things how you like them, it's time to attach. I used floral wire again just because that's what they had at the store, but you can use any other flexible wire that is in a dark color, or even tape that is in a dark color, although wire is definitely less obvious. For greenery, just cut a piece of wire that's about 10 to 15 inches long, or whatever you think is right for your wreath, wrap it around the stem a bunch of times, and then to attach it to the wreath, or the hose in my case, wrap the rest of the wire around the hose very tightly. And for extra security, you can twist the ends together. I honestly forgot to do this for about half of my greenery, so if my wreath falls apart, that's kind of my own fault, but it definitely does make things more secure. Now, this pretty much works in the same way if you actually want to attach two stems together before you attach them to the wreath. And that's actually what I did for my wreath because I used two different types of greenery. The only difference is that when you're wrapping the wire around the stem you want to attach to the wreath, just wrap it around two stems instead. As for the flowers, if you're working with a bunch of smaller flowers on a stem, just attach them in the same way you did the greenery. But if you're working with one large flower on a longer stem, then it's even easier. All you really have to do to attach that is just wrap the stem of the flower around the wreath. Pretty much every single fake flower that I encountered actually has wire in its stem, so it's definitely flexible enough to just do that. If your wreath is only made up of things with stems, congratulations! You don't need to use glue and you can get away with only using wire or tape. Now, I really like to make things harder for myself. I mean, I used the garden hose to make a wreath, right? So I decided to add fruit to my wreath. Since fruit doesn't actually have a stem that you can conveniently wrap around or attach with wire, I had to use glue, specifically hot glue. To make it stay, I pretty much just glued my fruit to whatever larger leaves I had attached to my wreath. I then secured those leaves to my wreath with more hot glue because, well, they suddenly had to bear a lot more weight and I didn't want them to come off. So let me just put on another lovely necklace for this part. Ah, so comfy, such range of movement, and it's clearly such a statement piece. Once the wreath is fine, it's time to hang it up using the same sticky hooks. And you see how I'm wearing it here, but I'm also hanging it up here in this clip. Well, this is like wreathception. So this wreath cost me around $15, and I didn't like it as much as the first one, but I still think it's pretty cute, and definitely cuter than no wreath. Do let me know if you liked this video, because this is pretty new territory for me. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!